Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Life Whispers podcast, the Love Whispers season. I am very, very excited. And again, I always start my interviews with this, but I am honestly really excited every time because I am able for this season to bring so many incredible stories and incredible people I've bumped into, some in expected ways, some in ways that align with like God. I was just talking to our guest that I'm going to introduce shortly. That honestly, this interview is just came at a moment where I was looking for this kind of story. And I'm very happy that I'm able to provide a platform for her to share this story as well. Throughout this entire season, you're going to see happy stories, thrilling stories, informative stories, and interviews. But I think something that is super important to also bring is that, love isn't always not I don't know, beautiful. I think it's always beautiful, but I think sometimes it's challenging, and it wouldn't be fair to keep going through the season without talking about many of its different challenges. And I think that's what Rachel, our guest today, is going to talk about. She went through an incredible journey, and I don't want to spoil. I'm terrible at giving spoilers always. But she went through an incredible journey, and I'm really excited that you guys will be able to listen to this, especially if you know anyone that has been through this journey. I think this is one of those interviews that you want to share with those people because she provides so many resources for those looking to overcome loss. So, spoiler, this is a story about lost love or evolved loss or challenging love. And I'm thrilled to invite you, Rachel, to talk a little bit about the journey that got you to write your book, which is called Wife, Widow, Now What? How has it been, and where it's going? So welcome to the podcast, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I was with one of the most incredible human beings for 11 and a half years, married for 8.5. We met when I was 19. He was about to be 26. My parents couldn't say anything because that was their ages when they got married. Um, and I moved here in Minnesota and when I was 18 from Michigan, not knowing one person. And I met this really cool guy my first semester.
You just moved there for new life
for
change?
school, for school to go to the University of Minnesota. I went for the anthropology program, studying cultures, things like that.
Wow.
And then at a friend that I met in the dorm freshman year, she ended up living with the guy she was dating the next year, sophomore year. And he had a birthday party and this older guy came and I met him. So it was like freshman or sophomore year, first semester. And I remember my dad was upset because my grades weren't as good that semester. I just had some really hard classes and he was like, it's because you have a boyfriend.
You're distracted.
Which was probably partially it, but I had some really hard classes. But
anthropology sounds rough, so I believe you.
Yeah, it was linguistics. It was tricky. So I had just an amazing relationship with him. I graduated in 2004 when I was 22, and then that was in June, and then May, June, then I got my first quote unquote real job. And then that August we got married, and he worked nights, so I didn't see him that much during the week. And when we would get together on weekends, we would this was back when you would actually record on VHS, what you missed on TV. So we would watch 24 or whatever and, order pizza and just be so excited to be around each other. Because we were ships passing in the night. Yeah. And the things that we thought about was I called it a space age marriage. We hardly ever fought. And the things we would fight about would be stupid, nitpicky stuff. Like I talk about in my book, in the apartment where we lived, he would never do the dishes. And he couldn't do the dishes when he got home from work because the kitchen was by the bedroom. So it would have woken me up. So I would passively aggressively stack them on a cookie sheet. I'm not doing your dishes. You do your dishes. And they might be there for a couple weeks or whatever. But it was stupid stuff like that. At the time it makes your blood boil. But I mean, you look back on it and you're like, oh my gosh, it was perfect besides that. But he was a really, really great guy. And I feel like there was a huge blessing that I had the security of being with someone and comfortable in that way. But also because he worked nights, I had jobs, I hung out with my friends, things like that. So I got to navigate who I was as a young person in my
Yeah,
20s while also having him. And so I
that's
had that
perfect.
yeah, so I had that balance and independence of not being like codependent or, you know, all those things. And I
Mhm.
don't have any family here. So that was, you know, family was my friends, is my
Yeah.
friends. So when I was 28, um, I was 27 and I thought I had this terrible year. I fell, broke my wrist, you know, thought that that was catastrophic. That was in 2010. Then that summer, I had horrific endometriosis pain, like all these explosions on my ovaries, things like that. I found out I had endometriosis and I might not be able to have kids, and, you know, was going through my own stuff and depression and thinking that was bad. Um, and
Was
then
that something that like, and sorry to interrupt you, but
you're fine.
um, so because you're super young, recently married, such a great relationship, now you have something, and I know where you're heading, so I want to interrupt a
Yeah.
little bit before. What were those dreams that you guys had as a couple? So obviously, if this affected wanting to have children, or what was that?
Yeah. We lived in an apartment most of the time. So by the time he got sick, like we had been married 6 years together, 9, and we wanted to have kids. I really wanted a little me and him running around. We had bought a house when I was like 27, 26, 27. We hadn't been in our house that long when he got sick, just a couple years. But just, you know, the house, we had the dog, we, you know, got a puppy, really wanted kids, wanted to travel, do different things like that. That was our dream, that we were going to travel. Um, and it, when you're that young, it seems like you just have your entire life in front of you. It's unlimited. And you know what? It's not true. So, um, New Year's Eve 2010, we did like the September before, when he, so his birthday wasn't Halloween. Um, we went to Portland to see some friends, and then as a surprise, we got train tickets, and then we went to Seattle to this music festival and stuff like that. So that was our kind of our last big hurrah, which we didn't
Mhm.
know, for his 35th birthday. And then on New Year's Eve of 2010, we had Chinese food, and he had a fortune cookie that said, "You're about to have a major life change." Well, that's not the kind of life
Wow.
change we wanted, right? Like, it's like, it's very creepy.
Uh-huh.
And he actually started not feeling well. He worked for 12 years at a printing company where he printed flexible, he made up the colors of ink that got printed on flexible packaging, like, you know, bags for bookstores, all kinds of stuff like that.
Mhm.
He would actually make the colors. And he was the only person that did that. And he was working such late hours and all this overtime that he didn't look that great. He was very fatigued. He was always kind of naturally pale, but looked really pale. And he actually had a coworker say to him 2 weeks before he was diagnosed, like, "Hey, Grayson, you look like really pale. What do you have? Leukemia?" Like,
Oh
I know, like
God.
that person must have felt horrific when he was
Yeah.
diagnosed. Like yikes, better watch my mouth the rest of my life. But he just sent me a text when I was at work one day. It was January 11th. It was a Wednesday. And he just said, you know, "I went to the doctor. I don't feel well." Because the night before, I woke up to go to the bathroom, and it was like 2 a.m. and he was sitting on the floor in our kitchen because he couldn't even stand to wait for the microwave. He was that tired. I was
Wow.
like, you know, "Here's the card of my doctor. You should go." And he went, and they just thought that he was anemic or something like that. So they told him to get blood transfusions. So then he went, and when the blood transfusions were almost done, they said, "You need to go to the Humphrey Center." So we drove there, and then we saw, when we got there, is the Humphrey Cancer Center.
They
And
missed cancer.
yeah, so he was actually misdiagnosed with something else, not blood cancer. And then we got a call a couple hours later, and they said, "No, you know, we need you to come in and get a bone marrow biopsy." And he was just crying, just profusely crying. And I was just like, you can't freak out. You can't freak out. You can't freak out. You can't freak out. You got to be the strong one. So I
Yeah.
called my parents and I was like, I think he has cancer, and they called my brother and he ended up showing up the next day, which was amazing. But he had the bone marrow biopsy on Friday, and by Saturday, he was diagnosed with cancer. He was in the hospital hours later. And by the following Thursday, he started chemo. And what was really odd is when you're this young and you get cancer, you have to, so he was 35, you have to freeze your eggs and harvest your eggs or freeze your sperm because they, want you to be able to, you're not in the
I
right
think
mind.
about this.
Yeah. And I actually have a friend that's a young widow that I will talk about later. But for her, she got sick last May. She was like, they gave me the option, but it was like, I need to live first,
Yeah.
so it's all those things that you're just like, what? So we did all of that. And then, I talk about it in the book, but it's like taking this sperm sample in the middle of winter when it's like 10 degrees out. Right. So I like bundle it up in a bag and a scarf and all this stuff and like take it in my purse and, take it to the clinic. And a friend of mine was like, well, you can tell your kids their first car ride was without a seatbelt. So like we had humor, the whole time, despite how awful it was. And then, so he was in the hospital for 5 weeks and it was like really hard chemo. Because of his age, he was able to be in a protocol that's for children. The cutoff age was 35. So they wanted to try this on 19 through 35. And we were blessed that he was able to be in it. But so kind of side note, now that he's been gone for years, I'm in a lot of advocacy, which we'll talk about later. But one thing that's like really important to bring up is, so one of the things I'm trying to help with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society right now is I'm doing a campaign trying to raise $60,000 in his name. One of the really tough things is for blood cancers and especially leukemia, when you treat kids, well, first of all, it's crazy. So it's like every 3 minutes, someone is diagnosed with blood cancer anywhere in the world. Wow. Every 9 minutes, someone dies of blood cancer. And it's the number one childhood cancer, like leukemia, blood cancers. And 80% of those people have, that are childhood survivors have later really big health issues. So what I'm trying to do is raise money and awareness for all these types of things. So why I'm bringing this up in general is he got a lot better. But it was like my parents moved in and took shifts because what happened is you get out of the hospital, but then he had to go to the clinic like 5 times a week for like 2 months, then 3 times a week for 3 months. So it was a lot, right? And I couldn't do it and work and all this stuff. And he got better and he was in remission. But then the pills and the things, within a year, his hip had collapsed and was starting to fall out of the socket because the drugs beat the cancer, but the treatments for it don't quite have it. So that's what the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society is trying to do. And they're amazing. They're where they have cutting edge research that now their methods and treatments for different things are being used for other forms of cancer, which is just amazing. They're doing so much.
Same treatment that kind of weakens the body and makes it kind of relapse after.
Yeah. Well, it's really hard because they give you steroids, and what they don't talk about is like chemo and radiation and things are really hard, but the steroids just, like my friend that's going through it right now, like she has horrific headaches and back pain and all these different things. So it's, you might, like he had, I remember I brought him home from the hospital after the 5 weeks and he had like a shopping bag. Imagine a shopping bag full of pills.
Wow.
So I think he took like 25 pills a day or something like that. So it's a lot. So there's a long way to go because we're treating it and you're curing people in that way. Yeah. But
yeah, it just like everything, it has side effects and it has like, okay, it fixes this, which is a lot of, like, my mom is also a cancer survivor and she didn't want to go through many of the treatments because she was like, I don't know what's worse, right? Like the fixing or the side effects that come with it.
Yeah.
So, where's your head at this time when you're seeing this whole treatment? It's obviously conflicting with like your daily life normally. Are you expecting the worst? Are you thinking this is something that's, gonna pass? Are you being optimistic? How were you feeling at that time?
Yeah, it was a balance of both. Like every day in a piece of your mind, you're like, oh God, it's gonna die. But you also, I was talking about this on a like caregiver group the other day. You also don't have when you're the caregiver, especially the significant other spouse, you don't have the luxury to even go there because you have to be, you're steering the ship. You're the
Yeah.
cheerleader, the team captain, the everything. You have to be the strong one. And that's a really important reason why you need to get like a therapist or your own support system, because I couldn't let him know, oh my gosh, like, you can't die. I'm so scared you're going to die, because he had his own world of all of this stuff. So it was like we were together and so in love, and we would watch movies in the hospital, and I would sleep on the cot, a couple feet lower than him, and we'd hold hands while we're watching movies and stuff. And I
Mm.
made up and he would get fevers and things and have to go back to the hospital. And, so it's not like he was just in the hospital once. You're in the hospital a lot over the course of a couple of years. So the people there were always like, the lovebirds are in their apartment. And it's, really stressful and extremely like just levels of exhaustion and fatigue, because you work for 8 hours, you run home, let the dog out, then you run to the hospital, then you're there for a couple hours and you're trying to be cheery and da 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 da. And then you go home, you might have 20 minutes before you crash to watch, half of an episode of something, and then try to make your animals feel loved, and then pass out and start all over again the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And what was funny is I was like, there's no way that I want my mom. I'm 28. There's no way I want my mom and dad to live with me. And they did. And it was phenomenal. And now my parents and I are like forever bonded through this. And my husband's gone. But the balance of those things did allow me to have more time with him, to have more energy. I wouldn't have to worry about taking the dog out because one of them would be there. They would have. And what breaks your heart is, you have the professionalism at work, but what I did at the time is, so I work in mental health. I have my master's in social work. Is I was working with people like in the community that with serious mental illnesses. So you don't share your life at all. They know nothing about your personal life. Your coworkers do, but like your client you spend all day with, these people, they know nothing. So you have to just go in with armor on. And that was so hard because you're just thinking like you just have to totally compartmentalize your life, all of it. But the blessing was like I'd be able to call my parents that were at the hospital with him and say like, hey, what did the doctor say? What's going on? All those types of things. Then I would get there to the hospital and they would go home. We'd kind of switch shifts.
Yeah, really.
But
It's
what
the role of empathy is so important, right? Like you're probably working with these scenarios, and I don't know much about social work, but I can imagine it's challenging from like the people that you work with. And it's just knowing that like whenever you think something's hard for you, you have no idea what the other person's going through. So it's crazy how it's a good reminder that we don't know if someone's blocking off all these circumstances they're going through. You have to be empathetic at all times.
I have these examples in my book of when I just lost it. I just lost my shit. There's no other way to say it, where I had to check myself. I remember being at Target and just, you're here, it's Minnesota, you're running around, you're like all sweaty in your winter coat, right? And totally different from where you are.
Yeah, very different.
But I remember like being in the food aisle or something like that, one of them. And there was a lady in aisle over and she was complaining about having a cough, like her cough wouldn't go away. And she was on her cell phone to somebody. And I just wanted to scream at her, like, my husband's in the hospital. I don't know if he's dying, like, shut up, blah, blah, blah. But to her, that's a significant thing in her life. But when I was going through this, it's like,
I can't.
No, I can't deal. I can't function. So as far as my book going forward a little bit, So this is the first of its kind ever. That's a narrative with resources. So I walk you through when I had to figure out insurance, how to navigate insurance, treatment, diagnosis, all of it. I help you walk through all of it. So it's totally a toolbox and guide, how to get through it all with my love story. Because that's the tricky thing, is when your person that you love so much is going through these things, you're just like, I don't want them to die. But you have to
Yeah.
like do all these things. And what's interesting that I found out is I feel like it's different for our generation, but a lot of people, the men like did the finances or the cars or all these different things. For us, that wasn't, I mean, we were like 50-50, but even still, like I had to talk to his HR department. You know, I'm talking to human resources. I'm working on disability, da 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 da. Taking over things that, you know, weren't even part of my world, having to
Mhm.
navigate all that because he was the sick person. And by the way, I'm going to promote, if your employer offers long-term disability insurance, totally get it and pay for it, because he had short-term disability where you get like a little chunk of your what your check would have been for up to 6 months. But he was like, I'm 35. Why do I need long-term disability? Right?
Wow,
You
you
don't think you're
never
going to get
know.
yeah, yeah. So it's those types of things. You need a health directive, you need a will, you need all those types of things, you know, if you're going to be on life.
Regardless of age.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. After he died, I'm like, I had all the paperwork and sent it to my parents and my siblings. And but um through it was really tough. I had hardly any energy. I have no idea. Sometimes I have no idea how I did any of it. And but I did.
You
And
mentioned something in I'm not sure exactly where I read it, but of course you have no idea what you're doing. There is no way that anyone at 28 is and before 28 is thinking of, anything regarding death or wills or insurance.
yeah,
Like that's just not that's it's normal, right? Something you mentioned is also obviously you're trying to be the strong one in the house. You're trying to learn as you go, but build that wall to not like interfere with whatever he's going through, which is obviously 10 times more intense because it's his life on the line. But you
yeah,
mentioned that also you're a 28-year-old who is like going through the possible death of their partner and that unrelatability to people around you who are the same age. How was that experience? Because you're right. I'm 29. I'm not sure I would know how to give support to someone who's going through that. So how was that challenge and were you able to find people your age that were able to navigate that with you?
you know, not really. So I've had people that are like, you were so good at self-care, that read my book, and I was like, after the fact I can reflect on it. um I continued to do things like go to concerts with my friends, things like that, and it was really tough because you worry, are people going to judge you, you know, stuff like that, but you have to have some semblance of normalcy. So later on in his illness, I had one of my sisters and a friend that like he and I were arguing. They're like, be nice to him, he's sick. And it was like, no, he's like being a jerk. Like, we're going to continue being us. And the therapist I had was like, yeah, totally, just continue being you. But I had friends, they were great. They would come and they would, you know, come to the hospital. We'd go to the cafeteria upstairs and have dinner or whatever. They would meet me where I was at. But I think for the most part, I'd say like 90% of my support from friends and whatnot was all via those posts. So I would make my post, they would reply. And I have in my book, which is unique, I actually have their answers like, oh, praying for you, thinking of you, hugs, da 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 da. So you can see like social media saved my life in a way. And this was
Yeah.
10 years ago when he got sick in 2011. So now it's more boom in your face, and I feel like it's still great, but less sincere in ways. But
Yeah.
In 2014, no, excuse me, 2012, I joined Team in Training through the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and trained among people that had lost their siblings, their parents, a couple of them, you know, a really close friend, spouse, whatnot. And being able to just be around people that were assigned to be a mentor or who had heard it, even if it wasn't my exact situation, through the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society that did that blew open my world. And I did a half marathon when he was in remission in 2012. And then I did one in 2014, the year after he died. And that has just provided me with people in my life that are still there,
Yeah.
which has just been amazing. So I really didn't connect with people like myself in ways that people that they got it. The tricky part was on our 8th wedding anniversary, 2 days before that, he relapsed. So he had to go in the hospital on our anniversary. And I remember even trying to look cute to go to the hospital. And he was joking with people, this is our anniversary present. And people were just visually crestfallen. I mean, they loved him. He was the nicest, sweetest guy. And they were all just so sad that he was sick again. And his like Obi-Wan Kenobi last hope was a bone marrow transplant. And everyone knows that those are really hard. Some people don't make it. So he actually had chemo so many different times and his body just wasn't taking it, wasn't wiping out what it needed to. Basically, when you're going to get a bone marrow transplant, they have to bring your immune system down to like a newborn, wipe everything out. So he, hung in there the whole time anyway. And what was interesting is on Christmas, I'm sitting on Christmas Eve in the church with my mom. He's in the hospital. We had like seen him earlier in the day. We were going to go to church and then go back. And I was going to spend the night there with him. And I'm sitting there and our pastor is talking about Mary and Joseph and how they had to wait and had to be so patient, da, 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 da. And then he's like, very similar to a very kind man that I know that has had to wait, for a bone marrow transplant. And I was just like, oh, he's like talking about my husband. And it's like, how church is more packed on Christmas and Easter than it is all the other days or whatever.
Yeah,
so it's packed. And I'm like, these hundreds of people have no idea it's about my guy. And like, it was just so weird and surreal that this is my husband. This is our life.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he'd given permission to the pastor and everything, but it was still very surreal. It was incredible though. I just felt so humbled. And
I think you're seeing it from like a third person point of view when you're listening to it in that point where you're exactly, it's like a shock. It's like if you were listening to it at a conference or like me listening to you, but you're like, wow, this is really happening to me.
Yeah.
Like it's a reality check, even though obviously you've processed it at that point, but must be weird.
Yeah. And then, so that was Christmas. In January, I had really bad endometriosis pain again, on my like pelvic area. So he and I went to an appointment at my gyno surgeon. And then we went to like Whole Foods across the street. And to us, that was like a fancy date because he couldn't go anywhere because of his immune system. And it ended up, that was the last time we ever went anywhere together. And a week later, he was in the hospital and it was really weird. It was really eerie. The night before he went in the hospital, he was, dancing and singing and, being his normal goofy self. And he would make me laugh so hard. I would just bust up laughing in bed. My mom would be like, "Are you okay in there?" But
that's awesome.
Yeah, he was just so funny and he knew how to make me laugh and he'd do these voices and stuff. But seeing him like sitting in this chair drinking a cup of tea the night before he left, I somehow knew he was not going to come back. Like I didn't want to know that I knew, but I knew, if that made sense.
Did he know? Do you think he felt like it was coming?
I don't know, because I didn't ask him. But my parents left the next morning and took him to the hospital and I just had to go to work. And then he was in the hospital 90 days. And the week of his bone marrow biopsy, bone marrow transplant, he had like insane space age radiation. He was one of 60 people in the world that had this that targeted his marrow. And he had that. He had a lot of chemo. And when he had that, I was in a different hospital having surgery, getting all the adhesions scraped off my reproductive organs. So then the actual day of his bone marrow transplant, we're both sitting there on painkillers like, ugh. It was just ridiculous, but we still managed to connect. And he went through insane amounts of medication where he was just off the wall nuts, didn't know where he was, who I was, all these different things. His hair had fallen out, of course, months before, but like he's growing a new color of hair, and he's getting new layers of skin, and this old skin's peeling off, and I'm putting lotion on his hands and clipping his nasty toenails, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what love is.
This is
Like,
love.
but it was what it was. And then one day I got a call in March, and he could not breathe. And he ended up being put on a respirator, and they thought that he was going to die. And it was horrifically scary. And he got off, and it was within 2 weeks, he was in rehab, learning how to walk again, was doing amazing. And he ended up, he had a blood clot in his lung, and one in a million people survived that. And he did.
Wow.
And then, so that was around St. Patrick's Day. And then he went back in the hospital just because it ended up like all the prep for the transplant, even the transplant took, ripped apart like his kidneys, his bladder. He had a virus. His lungs were not great. So on April 17th, worst day of my life, I got a phone call, and he told me that he needed to put him on the vent. And we said, I love you 3 times back and forth. And that was the last time I ever talked to him. So I didn't work. I went to the hospital. They had just put him under. My dad and I were holding his hands because he was freaking out, or they just put the tube in. And I was like, medicate him, dope him out. And I had a bunch of doctors come in and tell me I'm sorry. And I knew, that was it. So they said, we'll decide in 24 hours. And I thought, well, great. Or no, 48 hours. In 48 hours, it's my birthday. Wonderful. So then on my birthday, we were told we'll wait till Sunday. Wednesday was the 17th. My birthday was on a Friday. And then that was just really weird and surreal. So an amazing benefactor, you could say, a friend of a friend that I later became friends with, his wife had died 6 months before my husband did of nearly the same thing. And she gave me a card that he had given me with 5 $100 bills. So due to that, I was actually able to stay at a hotel across the street. So I would sit with him, be with him, then go to the hospital or the hotel, excuse me, just completely pass out, take my Benadryl, eat my snacks, go to sleep, wake up, do the same thing. And I was just like a robot. It's really hard to explain because it was just like, this is what it is. I know he's going to die. I'm pretty sure I was taking Xanax and stuff like that as well, but it was just robotic. And what's tough is you just want it to be done.
Yeah,
you're
it's
like
limbo of like, you're not
yeah,
here, you're not there.
Yeah. And it's just like, I just wanted to like pull the plug myself because it's just like, he is not there. And what killed me, so he was 6'2", just this gorgeous man. And, it got to the point where he had, he's laying there, he's connected to all this tubing or whatever. And of course, you can't get up and go to the bathroom. You're barely there, a person, right? So they needed to clean him up. He had gone to the bathroom. They needed to clean him up. And the reason I bring up his height is he's in like a Hoyer lift above the bed, and his long arms and limbs, are hanging on either side. And I'm looking up there thinking, who is this? That's not my husband. You're gone. This is like, no, like this, no. And I have a lot more details of different things in the book of, him opening his eyes and us having a quick little conversation and nodding and whatnot. And, we were I knew he was going to die, but you still pray and hope there's going to be some sort of miracle, right?
Yeah.
So then 2 days later on the 21st, his doctor came in and said, Rachel, buddy, I'm sorry, today's the day. So I took him, had the pastor come, everybody came, parents, and did the last rites of passage. And then I cleaned him up, and then they took him off the vent, and I held him and played music until his heart stopped. So he made these like, I could go into it, but he made these like animalistic noises of trying to breathe, and it was just horrible. And I didn't cry a tear. I know that probably sounds really weird, but I had to sign the papers of, yes, donated his body because he wanted to donate his body to the University of Minnesota. Stop drinking, stop the food, stop the hydration, da 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 da. And I really feel that was God's peace, why I wasn't freaking out, but I was just so calm and so robotic. And I think because I knew that he wasn't really even there anymore. And I knew my life was going to change in ways I could not expect. Even just talking to you right now, it's this surreal
It comes
thing
back,
of,
right? Like if it was happening now,
well, more I'm thinking like, was this my life? I
right?
know that sounds really weird. It's so weird. Like if I didn't have the book, if I didn't have his name tattooed on my wrist, if I didn't have pictures or people that were part of it, I might not believe it ever happened. I mean, it'll be 8 years in a month, but writing my book. Okay, so then I was a widow, right?
Yeah.
I was a widow. It was horrible. You can ask me tons of questions about that, but I decided a year after he died, like, I got to write this down because so many people are going through it alone and it's terrible. And the people that I tried to connect with or glean support or glean whatever on Facebook, their significant others were husbands had come back from Afghanistan, taken their own lives, had died there, had tragic accidents, different things. My situation was as awful as it was. I was able to be there with him. I saw his body fall apart and it made sense. Like, not in the grand scheme of things, but it made sense. So to answer your question in a long roundabout way, that made me want to write a book because I thought, this is so hard. And I want to help other people. And, how to plan a funeral. When people want to help and they don't know what to do and you don't know what to tell them to do, here's a list. These are tangible things. All these, I wanted to do that. And like the first anniversaries, the first birthdays, all these kinds of things, what to do, what to ask people for, all these things. So I have all that in there. But after he died, it was just weird. There was a snowstorm on April 18th, and I love snow. And it snowed on April 22nd, the day after he died. And I believe that was like a sign from God that, like, you're going to be okay. I gotcha. He's up here. We're good. He's all checked
Watching, I'm watching. I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was really tough. I would not wish this experience on my worst enemy, but
Yeah.
I'm here and I did it, and ask me anything.
I love your attitude, your energy, your humor, like everything that, like the way you're telling the story is very, uh, very remarkable. I really admire you for your strength because I feel like you're able to see it from another perspective. And I guess you yourself are kind of in shock of the perspective because you're like, is this my life? Right? Like you've detached from this experience, but not emotionally, just like look at this holistically. I love that you created this book with all these resources because you mentioned something that I think is really interesting. I think when you aren't a widow, you think you're either a widow or you're not. And I think inside the world of widows, there are so many categories. So it's not as easy to relate to another widow because of the how. And I'm sure the when, because it's not the same being a widow when you're 60 or 75 and you've been able to live a fulfilling life together versus when you're 28 and you're just starting to dream together.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like prepping for the end, you were able to have that time with him and kind of process it, even though I'm sure it's still hard to process, as it clearly is. Versus, something shocking that you can blame, war, or someone, like you can blame it on someone. Right here, it's like there's no one to blame. So I'm sure that's very interesting, and it's a great resource for people to have a book where they can navigate that and navigate all those, as you mentioned, these tangible things, how to deal with the people, how to deal with the paperwork or planning or finances. So that is,
Yeah. And the tough thing is, like, you find yourself. So, first off, like, I edited this like 8 times. I had a professional editor as well, but every time I did, I found myself more distanced from it. And it made me so remarkably sad for her. And the weird thing is, it was me. Like, if that makes sense, you're just like, oh my gosh, this girl, what she went through. Oh, it's awful.
It's like a character, but you're the character.
Right? And the weird thing is, when you're young and a widow, people don't know what to say to you. And you find yourself reassuring them instead of them comforting you. Like, oh, I'm okay. It's, he was great. He was sick. I got to be with him, blah, blah, blah. But it's so taboo. But the thing is, so I'm finding out the more that I'm talking about this book and getting it out there, that I initially wrote it for the Cancer spouse, significant other. I have it inclusive to anybody, any, sexual orientation, religion, whatnot. And now I'm finding like it's any sort of catastrophic illness, any sort of big thing, it could be applicable. I think it's entertaining because I'm really weird and have, antics and shenanigans of all my life falling apart and all these things that happen that you're like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? More keeps happening to her. It's been a really interesting experience because I keep learning more about myself through it. And the more I'm talking about it, and it really is applicable, this book, to anybody, because the tricky thing is when you have someone that's going through something and you want to support them in adequate ways and you don't know how. And as a Cancer wife, then widow, one of the most awful things someone can say to you is, I get it, or I understand, or I know. It's like, no, you don't. Like, you don't know. And I'm sorry your parent died or your sibling died, but it is not the same as the person you had your hopes and dreams and you shared a house with. It is not the same at all. And just to be sensitive to that. And I want this book to be in the hands of millions of people, because 1 in 5 people are going to get cancer in their lifetime. And that's horrible. You think about all the people that that's horrible, but it's true. And you want to be armed with the knowledge and resources to be able to adequately support yourself, support someone. But yeah, it's a really tricky journey. And it's one of those things where I did lose a lot of friends, because not that people didn't care, but they don't know what to say to a 31-year-old widow. They don't know what to do. And after the big hurrah of, the memorial service, the funeral, your person's gone, they might check in on you for a couple months, but people go back to their real life. And that was the really hard, isolating part. And I found myself reaching out to people and inviting myself for dinner, or, I would post on Facebook and say, can someone come take me for a walk? And someone did. Or, can you text me? Can you check in on me? And I actually have all these alarms set on my phone now to check in with people, friends or people I know that are going through stuff, because our lives are so busy. You get so wrapped up in your own world. It really is important to remember to check in on people that need you, because I know when I had someone text me or call me or email me, it was like 1,000 hugs.
Mm-hmm.
Just those things, you really, really need them.
Yeah, I think it's also like you don't know where is the boundary of insensitivity. Like,
Yeah.
am I gonna ask you to the movies when your husband just died? Do you want to come for a drink? Can you drink when you're going through this? Like, it's maybe not that disinterest. It's what's the boundary, what's right and what's wrong, and you're so afraid to protect that and
Yeah.
to not hurt the other person, which it's happened to me. I have friends that have lost their siblings, and my best friend, literally when I was 18, her sister died, and you just didn't know when, until one day she's like, I like it when people ask me about her. Like, I do, like, I
Yeah.
want to talk to her. I don't want to pretend like she never existed. But everyone is so walking on eggshells with the topic because they don't want to hurt you. So it's
Yeah.
all it's a very hard, again, super grateful that you have these resources for people, because it's just hard. It's a very tricky situation.
And then 3 months after he died, I was like, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. I got to do something for myself. So I went to Alaska for 17 days. I took a cruise from the inside passage all the way down, all the way back up. And I just experience some of like the most amazing nature. And it was very, very healing, but also like just a bummer because he would have loved it.
Oh, yeah.
And what's funny is you have these different things happen over time. Like, um, when the final episode of The Office was on, I was like, oh my gosh, he's missing it. And it's like, no, he has unlimited channels in heaven. He's fine. Like, but it's like all those couple type things. I forget how many months after he died, but I was just so deflated to think about the fact that my person that I had inside jokes with was gone. You know, all those tiny little things pop up at different times and smack you in the face. So what I did, just so itchy, what I decided is, I don't know if it just clicked or it's a conscious thing that I made myself do, but I somehow, I mean, it was God, but I somehow was able to reformat because I had to reboot my life like a computer. I didn't have a choice. After he died, it was just like, I'm going to reflect on what I had, how grateful I am for what I had. And some days are going to be really awful, but I'm going to take his love and let it make me into who I'm going to be. And that's how I got to where I am today. But I believe that that made my grieving easier than it would have been had I been really bitter. And there, I have a chapter called Bitter Betty. There were some really bitter days, but I think because I consciously chose at certain points to reflect on what was and not what should be, even though there were a lot of what should be, that made my process of grieving more fruitful, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that line. I did hear it when I was learning a little bit more about your story. Be better or be bitter. And I think it's such a great state. Like, it's such a good thing to like pause and be like, okay, you have two options. How do you
Yeah,
want to? And it changes your entire perspective.
it does. And like some days I would post like, and I have the post in the book. Some days I would be like, today's great. I can't believe it's 3 months out from when he died. And I just feel so like today's a good day and da 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 da. And then the next day I'm like, ugh. So I mean, grief is a roller coaster. It bites you in the butt. You never know when to expect it. It can be a song, it can be a smell, it can be whatever. Um, it's one of those things where you just have to surrender to it. You can't try to avoid it. You just have to ride the roller coaster. You're buckled in and they've taken off and you can't get off. But I think that he instilled so much confidence in just appreciating me and loving me as a person that allowed me to, the year after he died, when I was dating and getting treated like crap because I didn't date. I met him when I was 19. I didn't date and I didn't know people lie so much. And it was the time of Tinder and Plenty of Fish and all this stuff. And I just kept dating and dating and dating because I was like, someone's out there. But the thing is, I didn't realize I had lost my self-worth value so much because I was so used to being the other part of someone. I wanted someone to care about me. I wanted someone to ask me how my day was, not that's like a sibling, maybe once a week, or my parents, or what I would deem a pity ask, or, things like that. I knew that I was a great person, but yet I was spending time with people who weren't respectful of me. I was drinking too much. I wasn't, I was going to church on Sunday. I was working 3 part-time jobs to try to make ends meet to afford this house that I thought, 2 people would pay for and fill with kids and all these things. And I just kept like chasing people who didn't want to be chased because I thought they were great because I knew I was a great person. So it was a really tricky balance because I was so full of the love and the knowledge that I was loved and knew that I had love to give, but I was trying to force it, if that makes sense. And
You know how it felt. You knew how it felt when things worked.
and people are so intimidated by a widow because you don't have an ex, you don't have someone that you hate. You like, sometimes I wouldn't tell people until like we met face to face. I'd say 90% of my dates were like just coffee or a cocktail or something. And it's just, I remember like, I don't remember the process because it was so many years ago, but it was like, I talked to someone, on the app and then you'd move to like text, and then you might talk on the phone.
The evolution.
But people don't even want to talk on the phone. And it's like, how can I suss you out? There was one guy I talked to on the phone, and he asked me if I caught my husband's cancer, and I'm like, click. Like,
what?
I know, right? So, but it's those things where it's just, I had so much emotional security with someone that I was ready to, or I thought I was so ready to move on in that way. And actually 6 months after he died, I started dating someone I dated for 6 months that I knew through Team in Training, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society marathon thing. And he was very nice and he was very supportive, but it was more, we were very not great matched, but it was like lidocaine, because it was just, I was able to kind of ignore my grief. And I mean, God love him, for I haven't talked to him in years, but like I would bawl, and then I'd be like, hey, do you want to make out? And he'd be like, no. But it's just like dating a widow, hanging out with a widow. It's totally different. It's totally different because your emotions are up and down. I remember we like did this Valentine's race, and like we're collecting our stuff to go start the race. And I'm like, he would have loved you so much. And he was like, oh God. But you don't, but it's like when you're me, you process it all out loud, right? So it's just really interesting trying to find love again, because I knew the worth that I had, what I had to give, what I wanted to give. I knew what I was looking for, but people just put on acts. They totally do. They totally do. And it's just ugly.
It sounds very interesting, but I think you were on the right side of it all. I think at the end of the day, it had nothing to do with you. I know it's challenging. I'm single, and dating is always challenging, especially when you're so sure of what you want. And it's like,
yeah,
you don't mind being yourself, even though sometimes it can be weird. But I think that is the best situation to be in versus I lost the one person that's going to love me. No one's, I feel like there could be so many other tangents where you could have gone through the experience that you faced. So this is actually, I think this was a better, like a better situation.
I actually learned a lot about myself through dating. Like it was like watching myself from above. I'm happy now. I'm happy and moved on, which you have to read the book to find out. But
I'm definitely getting the book, and I want to dive deeper into all of this.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where I can sit down, but at the time, like when you're going through it, you're just surviving. You really are. You're just surviving, and friends checking in on you every day, or a couple times a week is great, but that every day knowing you have that person, and I've had that for 11 and a half years, and then it's gone.
Yeah, and
so
it's gone in a way that you can't be mad at.
mm-hmm.
Like you can't be like, stupid ex, yeah, better like this new phase of my life. It's like, no, it's like leaving a chapter on its best part.
Mm-hmm. And my book is actually Rachel 1.0 is when he's alive, and 2.0 is right after I walk out the door of his hospital room, because it really was starting over. And there are a lot of trial and error and a lot of falling on my faces. I use the analogy, like you just got to lick the bottom of the barrel. And I have a friend right now who's going through some really hard, difficult stuff. Has 2 little girls, doesn't get to see him a lot. Evil ex-wife, stuff like that. And I just keep reminding them, like, you can only go up from here. I've seen it. I've been there. You can only go up from here. What I said earlier. So I have a friend that I met through Instagram when I was looking for people I thought my book would help, and under #cancerwife. So she took care of her husband for 2 years and 5 months. And then she got the exact same kind of leukemia he did. And then 4 months later, he died. So now she's fighting for her life in Canada. It's been like 6 months, and she's on her own and a widow. So just the like reflection of where I am and where I was, and what's really cool is it's almost, and she has the same kind her husband had, that my late husband had, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and just the parallels of what we have. I mean, we'll sit on the like FaceTime and just cry because and I'm 10 years older than her. So it's a cool dynamic of, she said many times, it's almost creepy how alike our stories are or whatever, but I feel really,
Like me in the future and then in the past.
yeah. And I feel really grateful for her as an amazing friend in my life, but feel really grateful that I can be for her the sounding board that I didn't have. And I feel like that's the vantage point of my book that I want people to get is, it's really tricky whether you have cancer or, Crohn's or diabetes or whatever is going on. There are a lot of resources and a lot of people like me that want to help, and the information's out there. And you said this earlier, I don't want to forget this. I did have someone in my life say, like, the day of the memorial service, "Oh my gosh, it was amazing. You're never going to find anybody again." And I was like, well, that's not helpful. Like,
Thank you. Thank you for those words.
yeah. And it's just one of those things where it's, I knew that I would have love again. I knew that, I don't believe in soulmates. I never have. I say my soulmate is one of my best friends, Emily, because we're just fun. And she deemed me a unicorn when going through my widow years, because she's like, "You're so unique, you're going through this." And she made me like unicorn scarves and stickers and all this stuff. And she always just says, "You're my unicorn." So it's like, when you can have those significant others in different ways, I think those are really important to have people in our lives, because it sounds awful to say it, but love does come and go, whether it's a significant other or a married partner or whatever. But to have the people that have been there, that's really important to have, as well as family, if possible. But I really don't believe in soulmates, because we could have 10 people, we could have 30 people that are suited for us amazingly, that God made just for us, but they're in Korea or India or, Australia or whatever, but you're never going to come across them because that's not where you live. And I think that by thinking that there's only one person on the earth for you, and that you will never find love again, is dangerous, because it really limits and shuts down the possibility of being open to that. How I've gotten this far is knowing I came from something good, choosing to hold on to that positivity and let it carry me through.
I love it. No, honestly, super admirable energy and sense of
Thank you.
humor and personality. I love it. And it's true. I'm watching this series called One. I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix, and it's that thought, that idea that you have this one match, right? And it's somewhere in the world, and based on your DNA, they can match you with this person. It's obviously, it's super dramatic and has a lot of things, but it's gotten me to thinking, and it's like, you are one person today, right? You were Rachel in your sophomore year, when you met your ex-husband, your husband Grayson, no Grayson, and that person that you were then is very, very different than the person you are now. I think genuinely you can have a soulmate for each version of yourself. And I think that is the misconception, that we have one soulmate for every part of ourselves, right? You are super energetic with an incredible sense of humor, and you must have someone that matches with that. But you're also philanthropic and you love helping people. So obviously you must have a soulmate for that too. You're also super go-getter and like, let's create assets and resources for people, and you're smart, and you find a soulmate for that too. And I think we all have a million personalities inside us, and we can have a million soulmates for each of those segments within us, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's what you're saying is very true, and it's living in that scarcity mindset, thinking that, oh, there's one soulmate. You're putting so much pressure on yourself and on that other person, right? Because how can someone fulfill all of your little personalities?
I pulled up one and it started playing it. I'm like, no, not now, because I want to find it. So it's, yeah, you said ex, but it's late husband. I'm not offended, but yeah. So you say late husband. So with that, yeah, it's true, because even in your city, there could be like 2 or 3 different people you just don't know. And I think that love is really tricky, and there are seasons of your life that are going to be really hard. And I am hoping and praying and triple knocking on wood here that all the really ugly stuff happened to me when I was younger. It's manageable. I could have much worse things happen. I've been through the worst stuff, so I'll take it, you know? And I think that it's just, you have to know that bad things are going to happen. Whether you have faith or not, God tells you, you know, make plans and he laughs. And, you know, you really can't pre-plan. You can try, but you really can't pre-plan. We can't, you know, do anything about it. And what this pandemic has really taught us is, you know, people complain that they're sick of masks and they're sick of staying inside and they're sick of all of these things, but that's the life of a cancer patient every day for years. You know, I know people with children that are, you know, almost dying, and some of them do, some of them don't. But my world was masking up and hand sanitizers and not being able to hug my own husband for like 35 days because I could have given him an infection when he had no immune system and all those types of things. So it really is about perspective. It's about perspective. It's about your willingness to say, you know, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. What if it was me? And that's not easy to do. And I think the tough thing is a lot of people don't want to go there and think, what if that was my child? What if that was my spouse? What if that was me? But if you can even do it for 10 minutes or pick up this book and read it, it might make you a better friend to someone that is going to go through it. And chances are, if you're at the pay it forward thing, a lot of people don't want to ask for help. I had a really hard time asking for help. And then some of those people that had helped me, I'm now helping. So chances are, throughout your lifespan in relationships with people, you are going to be able to help them when they helped you as well.
Very true. Very true. So remind us again, Rachel, what is the title? Where can people find it?
Yes. So Wife,
you?
Widow, Now What? It is available on Amazon in paperback or ebook version. If you get it in paperback, there's actually like a budget sheet and different things you can fill out. If you get it an ebook version, you can actually click on the hyperlinks and it'll take you to the different pages to be able to get some resources. But yeah, and then you can find me on Instagram or Facebook under Wife, Widow, Now What? And then on Facebook, I actually have a little private support group. If you have questions or whatever, you can ask questions. And I also, on all of these things, I have the link if you want to donate to Save Lives for Blood Cancer as well.
Perfect. I will be sharing it on the show notes, and I'll put all the links to Amazon and Facebook and everything so people can find you quickly. This has been an incredible chat. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and I hope someday we can meet in person.
Yeah, I've never been to Puerto Rico.
More than welcome. And it's definitely warmer than Minnesota.
Well, thank you, Viviana.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Honestly, again, I admire you a lot, and you're an incredible resource for so many people. And I can't wait to buy the book. And, you know, like you said, it's not necessarily if you haven't been through cancer or know anyone, it's being prepared, right? It's being prepared to handle that in the best way that you can.
Yeah, and it's a pretty cool love story too.
It's a very good love story. I can't wait to hear more. This has been amazing, but I know there's more in the book, so I can't wait to read it. So thank you, Rachel, so much. And everyone that tunes in, thank you for listening to another episode of the Life Whispers podcast. Take care.